Welcome. So this is a new sort of video that I don't really know what to do with, so I'm gonna just do the best I can. But essentially, it's a long chat with a former Neighbours star, and it's the sort of video I've been wanting to do for a long time. There's a few others in my sights that I would like to try and get on. Well, I'd like to try and get everybody on, but a few of my sites I could potentially actually get on in the near future. But yeah, this was something I wanted to do for quite some time. I've interviewed this person before, not on the channel, but for an article, and there was a lot that was said in that conversation that I couldn't cram into one piece. So that's why I've been keen to get him on the channel now. It's not just me and this person here. There is also a good friend of mine, Paul Sparks, who is a Neighbours guru. He knows absolutely everything about the show, and he's helped me out a lot when I've needed trivia, so it was good to have him on board to ask some questions that I perhaps wouldn't think about 1985 and 1986. So Paul, thank you for joining, and thank you to the one and only Danny Ramsay himself, David Clencie. The first person to speak on Neighbours is the first guest to speak on this channel, which is lovely. Here's the interview. And how's lockdown treating you out there? Because this is what, your third week of it now?
Yes, and we've got another 3 weeks to go, and it's challenging to put it mildly.
I didn't know you had another 3 coming up.
Yes,
A
that's
long
right.
time for lockdown. It's a lot longer than we've had, thankfully. Or mind you, we're in lockdown here. But how this came back, because we spoke originally when lockdown first started, didn't we? Sort of back in March, I think it must have been now.
That's right, yeah.
And we did an interview for Radio Times, and there was just a lot that was being chatted about in that interview that I couldn't put into a Radio Times piece because I had to condense it down into one article. So
Yes.
that's why I thought, you know what, let's get you on the blower and have a proper chat about it. And that's why Paul's here as well, so he can jump in with lots of 80s Neighbours questions and beyond, actually, because there's still a lot of things that have influenced Danny on the show today, with the Ramsay retcon and things like that, which we'll get to. But to begin with, your audition, let's go right back to pre-Neighbours either. What do you remember about that, sort of first hearing about the job in Neighbours?
Yeah. Look, I can remember not wanting to do it, basically. I, at the time, I'd sort of given myself a pass from acting. I decided that I was going to join the real world because I'd done the Sullivans, and I'd done Ark and Jump Puddles, and I'd done many shows in Australia, and I just sort of at the ripe old age of nearly 20, I thought, well, I'll go and do something different. So what I did was I applied for a job at Crawford Productions, who made did make many shows, and a terrific production company. And I applied for a job in the art department, and funnily enough, I got the job. So it's it's who you know. So I was sort of all set to be the next Francis Ford Coppola. I was going to be a director, and I knew actors, and and so forth. So so when my agent called and said, "Look, I've got an audition for you for a show. It's about a neighbourhood. It's about some families, and you'd be auditioning for the youngest chap in the in one of the families." And I said, "Look," I said, "Gary Stewart, his name is, and he's retired now. He was one of Melbourne's best agents." And I said, "Look, Gary, I'm really sorry." I said, "Look, I'm off on another tangent at the moment. I can't do it." And he, being Gary, he was very, very, very clever. He said to me, "Look, just go and do it. Just go and do the audition and see how you go. Look, you probably won't get it, but they have asked for you, so go and do it." So I said, "Look, I'll get back to you within 24 hours." And of course, he sort of planted the seed, I guess, and I started to think, maybe, and it sort of, I guess it stroked my ego a little bit. So, cut a long story short, I got back to Gary the next day, and I said, "Yes, look, I'll go." So when I got there was Jan Russ was there, and John Holmes, and Mark Joff, who directed the pilot episode, and the first episode. And I did my audition, and I knew 2 out of 3 of those people. I hadn't met John Holmes before. And that was that. And then, of course, 3 days later, they called back and said, "You've got the part." So that was it. I was, I wasn't going to be Francis Ford Coppola anymore. I was going to be Danny Ramsay.
So how long was it from when you got sort of the job to that first day? Did you have a lot of time between there to sort of build to it, or were you pretty much straight in?
Yeah, no. We, I'm pretty sure I was cast. I mean, everybody was cast at that time at the very last moment. And how they got the cast together was quite brilliant, really, because I remember Alan Dale and Paul Keane and Elaine Smith were basically cast sort of 2 days before, and I was cast about, I think it was from memory, probably about a month before, or maybe even 3 weeks. So
Wow,
it was pretty. Yeah, and that was 1984, and I'm pretty sure that we shot the first scenes just before Christmas in '84, and of course it went to air in '85 in March. So yes.
So with the cast, so someone like Alan Dale, I would imagine, was so well known within Australia. For him to be cast literally the last few days, does that mean that there was other people already had been given the parts and turned them down, or?
Yes, it's a good question. I do believe that Alan, he was living in Sydney at the time, and I don't think Jim Robinson was offered to anybody else, but I do believe that Max Ramsay was offered to Dennis Miller, a very good Australian actor, who's done plenty of films and a terrific actor, and he knocked it back. So, of course, Francis Bell was cast, yeah. But Alan Dale, no, I don't think so. I think he was offered it, but he may have, taken a while to make up his mind. I don't know.
I understand he was quite huffy in terms of negotiating his salary. So maybe there
probably
was
I would suspect so. Yes. Well, see, Anne Hattie and Alan came down from Sydney, so they were kind of the Sydney. And Anne was even cast quite late, and but Elaine Smith, I think, was the latest, and Paul Keane, of course, was a couple of days before as well. But how they got that cast together, because it was a remarkable cast, was quite extraordinary, really, with the time frames that they had.
So episode 1 then. That first scene, was that the first scene in Ramsay Street, the nightmare scene where you're all there, all gathered around, sort of experiencing Danny's psychedelic 80s trip? Was that the first scene that you actually shot?
It was Joe. It was a night shoot. I knew Peter O'Brien, who played Shane, of course, and I knew Vicky Blanche, who played the original Julie, but I didn't really know anybody else. So I think our call was around 6 o'clock, and makeup and wardrobe, and so it was pretty much a new experience, and that was the first time we shot it. We pretty much stayed in sequence for the first episode, the pilot episode, from my memory.
Oh, that's unusual, isn't it, for soap film as well? I guess because it was episode 1, that was probably how you were able to do it. But that must have helped, I guess, kind of get to know everybody and get to know Danny.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They were very meticulous in the way they wanted episode 1. They wanted it to be very good, obviously, and they certainly took their time with that. We generally filmed location the week before in the studio there at Channel 7 at the time. So we did actually shoot a couple of scenes the next morning, which was actually where you see Julie come out of the Robinsons' house and talk to Des, and then Danny's coming around on the bike, and then goes into number 24, which is the first time we see number 24. So that was pretty much 8 hours later. I think we finished about 11 o'clock that evening, and then the next day was back on location. So then we went into the studio and pretty much did it in sequence, yeah.
I was kind of curious to know, when you look at the dynamics of the cast, and it certainly backs up what you were saying, David, in terms of how great the cast have been pulled together. But I think the dynamic of the Ramsay family was quite evident from episode 1. And I was just curious to know whether you as a family unit got to rehearse a lot before you actually were shooting.
Yes, I agree with you. I think it was an amazing dynamic, and whether it happened by chance or whether it was, well played, I really don't know. But yeah, it was a good dynamic, and we did rehearse only in the studio. At on location, it was what they do now actually, which is rehearse record, which means you don't get time to, I guess, be creative and plan your moves, and then because the next day we would film it, so we sort of had a night to cogitate, what we were doing and what we could come up with. But and I think today they rehearse record everything, which should be an interesting thing for me because I'm not great with my lines. So and I think the fact that we did actually rehearse it was great for remembering your lines, because you'd pretty much turn up to the set the next day and you knew your lines. So, but the location has always been, just no rehearsal time. You just rehearse at location and then record straight away.
So those early, back to the Ramsays then, for those early scenes, sort of what's your biggest takeaway from those, from working with the likes of Francis Bell and Peter O'Brien, and the whole of the Ramsay crew, really?
Yeah, look, I mean, Francis obviously was just fantastic. I mean, a brilliant actor, but he was very much into ad-libbing, and he was very much into um, doing what he felt was right. He didn't necessarily stick to the script too much, which was pretty challenging, because you'd have to go with him, and if you didn't sort of nail it with him, then we'd have to do it again, and you're wasting time. So he was just he was amazing, and he really led from the front. He led the show in many ways. And Dasha, of course, was from Czechoslovakia, and she had language problems, and she had Bud Tingwell, a great Australian actor, who's passed away now, as her dialogue coach. And she really struggled. And of course, Peter O'Brien, I knew from starting out. So Peter and I were sort of already brothers, so to speak. So it made for a really interesting dynamic, particularly because Max was so ochre and so Australian, and Danny was kind of, well, he was almost leaving puberty, but sort of, and then coming into being an adult. Like, his voice wasn't broken like mine is now, and Peter was sort of a lot older, and then you had Dasha, who was really struggling with the language. I mean, it was difficult for her, but somehow it worked, and I think we did. The comedy came through, and I think I'm glad that people, sort of understood that and had a smile on their face when they were watching the Ramsays, because it was a bizarre dynamic, quite frankly.
It was bizarre, but it worked. And you mentioned the comedy as well. So for me, the comedy of them, it was really into 1986. It was when Max kind of came into his own a little bit more, which I'm not sure, obviously jumping ahead a little bit, I've skipped that whole year and we'll go back. But I felt that when they came back for that new season, they kind of tweaked Max a little, almost like the conversation he had with Danny changed something in him. And I liked that a lot early 1986. I thought you were all great together.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I think by the time we arrived at Channel 10, we were pretty comfortable with our characters. We sort of finished exploring, and we were pretty, and they were starting to write for us too, which helped. And that took a good 8 months or so when they started to see what we were doing. And we used to often do sight gags and walk into walls and bang our heads and do all sorts of crazy things, which kind of worked. And I don't think that type of thing had been done particularly in soap opera or soap series at that stage in 1985 in Australia. So we kind of got away with a fair bit, but it kind of worked as well. So
it certainly worked. The dynamic, I think, between you and Darius was spot on. So what was it like filming with him?
Yeah, he was great. I think, in some respects he held back a lot of Scott. He kind of played the quiet, nice, deep thinking, good friend type, and Danny was like a bit more animated and a bit more, we'll rush into this and we'll rush into that, and he I think in some respects he didn't actually show his true talent because he's a wonderful actor and a great guy, he was. And I just sort of felt that they sort of wrote him a little bit wet, so to speak, with due respect, of course, but that was kind of how it worked too. So but he was a great guy and a great actor. I'd never met him before Neighbours, but I knew of him because we were consistently going for the same parts. You know, we both started acting around the same time, about 13 years, about 12 years of age, and we're at the ABC, and you know, either he'd get it or I'd get it, and that was particular in All the Rivers Run, where he won a Logie Award, and then he was second to be cast as Joe Carmichael in I Can Jump Puddles, which I won. So we knew of each other, and we didn't think that we would like each other, to be honest. We were a bit wary of each other for the first couple of days, but then when we sort of went out and chewed the fat, we just realised we were exactly the same type of people. So it was really good. Yeah, that was a bonus, really.
I think one of the first big storylines I can remember with Danny and Scott was when they ran away after being accused of, I think it was a mugging of one of the local neighbours. And then obviously they ended up going away and staying on a farm with the lovely actress Gwen Plum. I just wondered if he had any memories of that, because obviously that would have been a big location shoot as well.
Needs to be a bit longer towards that way.
We haven't had time for that part yet.
Just making sure. I don't know what sort of brains you got, so I can't take risks.
We've done all right so far, haven't we?
Oh, I've seen worse. It's all right, I'm not stealing it. They're putting it somewhere safer.
Yeah, that's right. Look, that memory. Yeah, I do remember it, and it was great. It was great that we got out of the studio and we got into the country, and it was well written, and it was funny, and it was sad, and it was a really great storyline, and working with Gwen Plum was just amazing. She, she's such a wonderful actress, and she gave so much, and we really enjoyed that time. It was that was a fantastic storyline, and it really sort of brought Danny and Scott into their own, I guess. And there were some great scenes there. Yeah,
I think the other biggie for me was obviously the drug storyline that Danny went through. Which I think certainly for those days was something you just generally certainly wouldn't see over here.
And because it was very, very risky at the time, and with the 6 o'clock time slot, and I said to them, look, go for it. It's this show is about reality. This show is about this family and their conquests and trials and errors, and so let's do it. And it was a big risk, and they're doing it these days, and it's sort of like they're kind of saying, well, this is the first time it's ever happened. But yeah, right back way in 1985, Danny had his 18th birthday party, and I think he smoked a joint. And the moral of the story at the end was, don't take drugs. And it went over really well. It was extremely well received, which we were all quite surprised about at the time, because it was very, very risky as to whether people would respond to it. But at that time, it was an issue, and we were happy to do it. Yeah.
Did you always know that Danny wasn't Max's son? Was that something that was written from the start? Or?
Good question, Paul.
Yeah, very good question. I think from memory, it was. I've got the. It was written from the start because I've got the first episode, but I don't have the character synopsis, and I'm pretty sure that about 3/4 of the way down, they had that in mind, I think. So, but not that we were really acting it that way because, we pretty much took the scripts on face value, and Danny was his son, and that was it. So until we actually got the script, that because there was so many rewrites and they used to change direction so quickly, that it wasn't really in stone. But I can vaguely remember it being part of Danny's character synopsis and Max's. Yeah.
What was that like to film that? I keep skipping an entire year, but right towards the end of '85, when you and Francis filmed that scene between Danny and Max, where you had that out, really. What was that like? And was that the last scene that you filmed, what could have been forever, for Neighbours as well?
You're just as much my son as Shane is. Now, it doesn't matter whether you move away from here or not. As far as I'm concerned, as long as you live, this is your home and I'm your father. Now, I know I yell at you and we fight and that. Just the way we are. But underneath it all, I tell you, I love Shane. And I love you.
Dad. And I love you.
That's exactly right. We'd pretty much been told the night before that the show was finishing up, and we were in a lot of shock, and we were obviously fairly emotional, and because we'd worked so hard, and we'd really and done so much, and we felt robbed, I guess, and we felt cheated, and we felt that it really deserved a good audience, and so when we did those scenes, we had no idea, of course, that Channel 10 would be picking the show up, some weeks later, really. So it was genuinely quite emotional, yeah.
I have read that Channel 7 was so furious with Channel 10 that they actually burnt all the original sets. Do you know if is that true, or?
Well, not to my knowledge. I mean, I don't think, because I think around 1995, I think it was, there was an exhibition at the Melbourne Museum, and it had the original Neighbours sets in there, and it was right next to the Far Lap, the horse Far Lap, and talk about a dinosaur, and at the side they had the family tree of the Ramsays, Robinsons, and Des and Daphne. Now that set was the original set because, and I can guarantee that because it had my writing on it, because we would often sort of doodle, I guess, before we'd walk onto the into the homes, and just behind the set we were waiting to go on. So that was definitely the original set, and it was advertised at that. And of course, many people came from England and Australia to look at the original Neighbours set. Now that was the Channel 7 set, so I don't think it was burnt. No.
I remember the start of 1986. There was them rebuilding a lot of the sets. So
that's right.
Yeah. I think the opening scene with the Robinsons was them re-wallpapering, wasn't it?
Well, Darius Perkins' father, Robbie Perkins, was the original set designer, and he actually designed both sets. And I know that he had to tweak the Channel 10 sets a fair bit just to make them not identical for the show because of possible litigation. Yeah. So they were a little bit different, but they were pretty similar.
So the difference between 85 and 86, then, obviously the change of network, you had the cast changes. How was that sort of for you as David sort of coming in with all of these differences?
To be quite honest, it was very difficult because I had Francis there, and I had Peter there, and we had a new cast member in Anne Charleston, and She didn't really have a lot to do with Danny or Shane, really, for that matter, at the time. And my other sort of 50% of where I was at with storylines was with Scott Robinson. Now, of course, they replaced DeRice with Jason, and I knew Jason. I'm a friend of Jason's, and that was no problem. But Jason, they didn't write Danny and Jason as a twosome, if you like. Danny had grown up a little at Channel 10, and he was working in the bank with Des, which was great. There were some good storylines there. Yeah. So it was very different. It was very different, and Danny was more like a sort of a yuppie type, onwardly mobile, and reading the Financial Review, and a bit like the Alex from Family Ties. He was a bit of a smart aleck, and that all kind of worked okay until Francis Bell left, of course, and then he was sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So, but the very start of it, it was it was quite comfortable. There were some new characters like Clive Gibbons and Jeff Payne playing Clive Gibbons, and that was okay. We were all and Annie Charleston, but of course Kylie didn't come in till a bit later, and neither did Jason. Jason wasn't in the first week, I think. So when that first week, it felt pretty okay. It was good, and then the dynamics of course started to change. So that's Neighbours, isn't it?
So do you, obviously we can't speak to DeRice about that change, but did you speak to him at the time after the role was recast, and do you remember how he was about all that at the time, and the things okay between the two of you?
Yeah, look, to be quite honest, I thought that he would be going with all of us, and when I spoke to him about it, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not going," I was quite shocked and incredulous, because I said, "Well, hang on a minute, Scott's in the script," and so I rang my agent, and Gary Stewart said, "No, they've replaced DeRice with Jason Donovan," and Jason was being represented by Gary as well at the time, and I thought, oh, okay, right, fine, fair enough. Well, that's it. And so, no, look, DeRice and I, it was kind of, he wished me all the best and said, have fun, and I kind of was a bit taken aback, and just a bit sort of, I wasn't angry or anything like that. It was just a bit weird, I thought. And, DeRice didn't really make too much of it. And, he went his way, and I was sort of bang in the middle of it again, and off we went. So, but the dynamics were certainly different, and the crew, of course, were different. And I think the grain that they used in the video, and it just had a bit of a sharper look. It didn't look as kind of soft. Yeah. But look, the writers were the same. It probably wasn't as raw, I guess, and as kind of, but we still did, I guess, what we particularly Francis Bell and myself and Paul Keane, we still injected that comedy as much as we could, but it kind of tended to be a little bit more serious. I think that's how I felt about it. They wanted it to be a little bit more serious, and that was a bit of a disappointment. Yeah,
because it was certainly a different year when '86 came along. So Paul, have you got anything for the first bit of '86? Especially before we get to Francis Bell.
Well, to be honest, I was really interested in what your take was with Kylie when she joined the cast. Obviously, she was a little unknown at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can remember John Holmes saying to me, because we were rehearsing at Grundy's at the time in Abbotsford, because the sets weren't built. I can remember John Holmes quite clearly saying to me, "Look, there's a new young girl joining the cast. She's playing your cousin. Can you look after her for the day?" And I said, sure, and look, show her around and show her the coffees and introduce her to everyone. And I said, yep, no problem. So Kylie kind of came up the stairs, and she was such a small girl, and so tiny, and she looked like sort of butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. And she just finished school, and she was very young and very like alive. And I did that. I introduced her around, and that was kind of that. But at the time, we had no idea that she would be as big as she's become, and it's a full credit to her. Like she was very considered. She wasn't overly experienced. I think she'd done Henderson Kids, but she fitted in pretty well, and she was a real, a goer, if you know what I mean. She had a lot of personality, so she fitted in very well. Yeah,
she was just sort of like an explosion when she came on screen, wasn't she? I mean, the first thing she did was
that's right.
And then
exactly
an
right.
attitude that we didn't really have from other characters until Charlene came along.
Yeah, absolutely, and that first stuff that she did with Jason was fantastic. But I think Danny and Shane at that stage was sort of like, oh, that's the cousin, that's the small little cousin, go away sort of thing. That was their attitude. So it was like, oh God, not her again. But she was, she really hit it. Came on with a bang and just got better and better.
So let's talk Francis Ball then. So again, he's another person that sadly we can't talk to in person about the time they left. But just from your perspective, at least, what was it like around that time where he left, and how much warning did you get personally that he was going to be going?
Yeah, look, Francis, unfortunately, around I think about the February or March of '86, he became a little unwell. He had back problems, and it started to become a bit much for him, and I could tell that he wasn't unwell, and he just wasn't himself, and he would complain, and he would do all that type of thing, and nobody seemed to be listening. And I think when a push came to a shove, and when he was retired from the show at very short notice, it was, I was kind of with him, but other people they were like, well, maybe he's feigning it. Maybe he's just drawing attention to himself. Maybe he's just being a drama queen, where I knew that he was in the pain, but he certainly let everybody know about it. And I think, everybody had their own challenges, and I think it sort of, it unfortunately kind of backfired, and he was retired from the show, which was sad because in my eyes, he was when he was so supportive of me, and he was such a good man to work with, such a good actor, and it was just unfortunate that and he led the way, and he was really, I believe, the reason that Neighbours was popular in the beginning, and the reason that it's still going today. I think we've got a lot to thank him for. Yeah.
Couldn't argue with that. And it's funny, it's like I said before with Max, it's that 86 season is when I like Max the most. Like, that's when I really kind of connected with the character the most. And it's interesting that there was all of these problems going on behind the scenes, because you could on the screen, he was having the most fun he'd ever had on the show. So it's really interesting.
Absolutely. At the beginning, they wrote some really good storylines for him, which he didn't have at 7. Like, he had the pancake competition, and the fact that he was sick, but he wasn't really sick, and the Clive Gibbons stuff with the gorilla grams.
Auntie Madge is very straight-laced, isn't she?
Off her wowser, she is. Pity the poor mug who married her.
I don't remember.
No, she always leaves him up Cross Harbour looking after the kids.
She showed me a photo of Charlene. She looks like a real raver.
Charlene? A raver? With mother like that, you got to be kidding. Hey, listen. Hey, Jenny! Hey! Have a look at this! Oh, shh.
What am I supposed to be looking at?
The hairy legs!
Hairy legs?
Yeah.
Come on, Dad, what's the joke?
I saw 2 hairy legs. Looked like a
spider?
Yes, no, not a spider, you drongo. I'm going to take a look at these new Neighbours.
Oh, yeah? I'll come with you.
Was all fantastic stuff, and again they made him the central sort of character, I guess, and he was brilliant. He was in his element, but then bang, he's I'm not quite sure how he did his back, but it was certainly real, and I think a lot of people at the time didn't really take him too seriously, and he was in a bit of trouble physically, and unfortunately, he just couldn't go on.
Which is very, very sad. Do you remember the day when he actually walked? Like, do you remember sort of the atmosphere? How that was?
I can remember it well because he sort of grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and took me out the front, and kind of laid a max on me, so to speak. He sort of said, you know, he wasn't happy, let's put it that way. And, you know, I don't think he believed that the show couldn't exist without him, but he felt that he'd been treated badly. And to be quite honest, at the time, I agreed with him. I thought it was quite, you know, for all the work that he'd done and all the trials and tribulations that we'd been through with this show, that I felt that, you know, in hindsight, they probably could have, you know, maybe given him a couple of months off to recover, and then given him a genuine, you know, farewell, because if that was the way the two of them wanted to go, I felt that it was kind of the first time that had really happened with Neighbours. And of course, that's been the case with so many characters along the way of the 35 years. But he was certainly the first that got sort of catapulted into to oblivion.
Yeah, and he obviously still kind of had a fairly good relationship, because he came back for the 1000th party, so he didn't come back to the show as such, but he was there at that 1000th party with everybody. So
he sure was, yes. Well, that's right. He'd had plenty of time to recover, and but I don't think he was asked back at any stage. It had moved on, but you know, yeah, which is just how it is, I guess. I mean, it's you know, it's had many characters that have had a similar exit, and you know, that's Neighbours.
Interestingly, there's the character who reminds me of Max the most is a character called Joe Scully, and I won't get into the reasons why he left, but pretty much exactly the same happened. He was there one scene, gone the next, and then written out. And so not the last time. He kind of set the way for that happening quite a few times in the future.
Yes. Now, just remind me of the actor who played Joe Sully.
Shane Connor.
Yes, Shane. I know Shane. Yep, you're quite right. He very Australian and a laconic sense of humour. Probably not as big as Max, but yeah, very similar. Quite right. Yeah.
There was it's the same sort of personality, I think, from them. They're both loud, brash characters. They're both a bit similar as well. And it's just interesting that they both are left in the same way. It's just worthy of note.
I was interested to ask about Gary Files, because obviously when you watch the very early episodes with him in, you can tell that the dialogue would have been Max. Name has changed and so on. So I just wondered, is working with Gary, was that tough after?
It was really difficult, because I felt for Gary, because you know, he sort of came into the show and he didn't really know the history, and the dynamic wasn't there, and you know, I wasn't 100% either, because you know, I was carrying a little bit of angst, I guess, towards the production, and you know, it was done very quickly, and I just felt that it didn't really work, and he was a completely different character, although you're quite right, he was given many of the lines that Max had, and you know, I felt sorry for Gary, who's a very good actor and a great guy, who had to come into that situation where you know, there'd been such a big thing that had happened, because it really rocked most of the cast at the time. I mean, it was probably bigger than, you know, being axed at the time, really, to think that he'd be leaving so quickly.
He was such a central focus to it, and there was a certain shift. You could tell as soon as he was gone. And you're right about sort of Gary Files. It must have been so tough for him, because one of the first things I think he had to do was to come in and to have a go at a couple of the neighbours like Max would.
That's right, and I think I'm pretty sure that he was told that, you know, he was playing one of the lead characters' brother, and you know, I don't think he really had much idea as to what had gone on prior to it, because he was a theatrical actor and a very good one, and so there was a lot of pressure on him, and of course we were a well-oiled unit by that stage, so it was really tough on him, I think.
Talk about the departure then. How did that come about?
I think, you know, when they chopped Max off in the script, so to speak, they kind of chopped Danny off as well, and he had a fairly you know, not exciting exit, as we know. He was on the phone, which was, you know, a bit disappointing at the time, but that's how it was. So they did offer me another contract, but it was only 6 months, and I felt that was a bit of tokenism, really. And I felt that they offered me 2 episodes a week, so Danny would have appeared in only 2 of the 5, and I sort of felt that they wouldn't give him a lot of good storylines. And look, to be quite honest, I was exhausted too, because we'd worked pretty damn hard on that show for, well over 12 months at that stage. And, I having wanted to do something else prior to the show, thought that it would probably be best that I sort of move on and do something else. So we came to an amicable agreement where, and that's why Danny left in such a sudden fashion as well. So, but I was exhausted from literally working 12, 16-hour days anyway. So, I was quite happy to sort of move on at that stage. So, it was all good.
Was there any mementos that you took away from either the Channel 7 sets or Channel 10?
Just the first script, Paul. Because it was actually given to me in a bound copy, David Clencie as Danny Ramsay, which was really nice, and I've still got that. So, and I believe there's only a couple of those in existence. I know Stephen Dennis has one, and we don't know of anyone else that has the first script. I'm sure they're hanging around in people's garages or God knows where, but. Yeah, so that was a lovely present, and something that I've kept and cherish. Yeah,
it's interesting as well. Sort of you mentioned sort of Danny not getting a proper goodbye. It was kind of representative of the 80s, because there were so many characters that didn't, and for no reason either. Like, you could have given a proper goodbye. Jason Donovan in the end didn't even get a proper goodbye scene as such.
Yeah, I think that look. It's difficult for the writers, I think, and when somebody decides to leave and they do pay, it's kind of they don't want to make too much of the character because they're so popular, and they need to move on, and they need to make sure that they retain their audience. So I think it's just a production thing, and I don't think it's anything personal. And with respect to the characters as well, it's a bit disappointing for the audience in some respects. But I mean, look, at least they didn't kill him, so that's a good thing.
And speaking of which, you did sort of live to play Danny another day, didn't you? So there was 2005 where you came back for the 20th for that brief scene, and I remember you saying before that you weren't overly pleased with where Danny was.
Ramsay Street? Yeah, it was named after my family, the Ramsays.
They asked me to come back for that celebration, and they were quite excited, I think, at the time that they had an original cast member. But I just felt that they didn't really give the character enough thought. I don't think he would have been a pool builder. At the time he was upwardly mobile. He was into computers. He was a business type, and they wrote a huge monologue of which we only saw like 3 seconds, and I think that was the case with most of the returning cast. But I just felt that it wasn't quite in sync with where Danny was at. So it was quite difficult to say the lines, but they only took a quick grab anyway, so it didn't matter.
Did you get the opportunity to kind of give any sort of feedback at the time, or was it just such a quick process of here's your line, film it, see you later, we're off?
Yeah, look, it was a bit rushed. It was a bit rushed because they had so many people coming back, and they were filming all over the world. I think at that stage, they were depending on where the actors were. So, look, I turned up at the set. I can remember Jan Russ was there, and we rehearsed it. But it was, I guess it took about an hour. So it wasn't, it was typically in sync with their schedule. So, and then of course, we had the party, and that was kind of it. So, but I think they didn't really have enough time to do the character any justice. Yeah.
It is interesting though, because it was almost as if they wrote him like Max to a degree, like he'd followed Max's path into the career. And you're right, like Danny was never doing that. He was always sort of the conflict with Max that he wanted to go and do his own thing. So it was interesting.
That's right. Yeah. And that's where I think that they kind of didn't really delve into where he would really be at that stage. And if they'd asked me, I would have said something. But when I got the script, to think that he was sort of handing Max the spanner, building pools, was a bit far-fetched, because I don't think Danny was that type. I think he'd be the type that would pretend to be able to build a pool, but I don't think he was that mechanical type. I think he was more heading in the into the business world, and that was going to be his lot. So, but look, it was such a small grab that they did, that, you know, it didn't really affect his character into the future, and God knows where he'd be now. I don't know.
Oh, it's a good question, actually. Where do you think he'd be now? So what do you think Danny would be doing all these years later?
It is a good question. Look, look, he could be a number of things. You know, look, I could see him being not a banker, but a computer technology, a computer software innovator, something like that. Like, definitely and successful. He may or may not have been married. I think he'd still be the kind of nice, funny, you know, not so serious sort of type. But I think he would have matured a tad, and that's probably my first thought. But secondly, you know, he could be anything. It's Neighbours, and I mean, he could be a homosexual, and I say that with the you know, the utmost respect, because you know, he never really bedded down, or not bedded down, but they never really bedded him down with any female characters, which was quite interesting. And they used to have,
did he actually at all?
No, he tried hard, but he kind of didn't. He didn't really make it. And there was quite a few people that had raised eyebrows about his sexuality at the time. So, you know, there's every possibility that he may, in fact, be gay. So, and you know, that's yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, having a father like that is not unusual. You know, with many people that are gay, they have that overbearing type of disappointed father. You know, so it's a real issue.
Particularly in that time as well, particularly the sort of person Max was as well. That would have been very interesting.
Oh, absolutely, and not being biologically attached to Max, so to speak. You know, there is every possibility that he was. I think the writers sort of, in some respects, I think they made him a bit asexual. You know, he was more interested in doing what he was doing than women. He tried hard, but it was always a sort of comical flop. And whereas Shane was more, you know, the real man, and women loved him, and so on. So, you know, Danny could quite easily be gay, and you know, and very successful, and you know, with his God knows what sort of issues. You know, I mean, who knows where he could be at this stage? I think he'd be in Australia. Put it that way. I don't think he'd be overseas.
David, absolute pleasure as always. So we sort of chat semi-regularly on Twitter and everything now anyway, so I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. But thank you so much for doing it. I'm really pleased that we're able to get the first person to ever speak on Neighbours to do the first long interview on this channel, which is great. So it is much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Paul. And just remember, Danny Ramsay rocks.
Yes, he does. So that was our interview with David Clencie. It's Danny Ramsay from Neighbours. Fascinating to get so many insights into really old school Neighbours, sort of back in the beginning, back in that initial time where it was cancelled. Yeah, ultimate fan nerd moment. I've got other people I've got my eyes on to hopefully come onto this channel. Life's going to get a bit busy for me in the next few weeks, so I don't know when that'll be, but yes, hoping to do more of these because it's great fun. Thank you for listening, and there'll be another video coming on the way to the channel very soon.